On today's episode of the Harris and Vapnek podcast, we're bringing on Aaron Torres from Fox Sports Radio to talk about the NCAA tournament, recapping this past 2021 March Madness with Baylor lifting up the national championship, talk about how historic their run is, how it marks in history, how we should look at it from this past season, what Gonzaga's next move is, how if their season was a disappointment this past year, UCLA, their shocking run from the first four to the final four, Aaron's career watching NCAA basketball, and so much more. Great podcast with a great guy, Aaron Torres. Sit back, relax, and listen to the podcast with Aaron Torres starting right now. Now welcome on Aaron Torres, Fox Sports Radio host, also the host of the Aaron Torres podcast. Aaron, welcome on. How are we doing?
Harrison, man, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Great to finally be speaking with you.
It's great to be on with you, man. I appreciate your patience. We've been trying to do this, I think, at least a few weeks. And, You know, March Madness was every bit madness for both of us. I know you're doing a lot of stuff around Missouri. And, you know, I didn't have to travel this year. But, you know, between radio, as you said, you know, podcasts, watching games, reacting, all the stuff that we both do, man. I'm glad that we could finally find some time. I know it's a little bit after the season ended, but happy that we could find some time to do this, man.
Yeah. Did you miss the traveling from, tournament location to regional to Final Four?
You know, for the players, I think it's cool because you get to do new things and experience new things. And, you know, even this year, I mean, those kids were in a true bubble. You know, I mean, I was talking to coaches that, you know, I'm sure you probably saw the same Instagrams that I did and stuff. But, you know, it wasn't until – you know, players got in on a Monday and then they played that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And it wasn't until the following week that they were able to take an excursion to the zoo, take an excursion to play Topgolf. They were really, truly stuck in a hotel for, 8, 10, 12, in the case of Baylor and Gonzaga, 20, 25 days at a time. So for the players, I think, one, it's cool to kind of see different areas of the country, all that stuff, and obviously have a little bit more of normalcy. For me, it wasn't really all that different. I generally go to the Final Four every year, and it's really just a great place to catch up with friends, catch up with people that you don't get to see over the course of the year. But when it was clear that it wasn't going to be a normal Final Four, I kind of resigned myself to the fact that, I'll stay at home and hang and watch it this year. And that's exactly what I did. It was great. You referenced I work for Fox Sports Radio, and I was on air when the Jalen Suggs shot went through. My radio partner was remote, and his TV was about 10 seconds ahead. And I thought he was full of you-know-what when he said, "Oh, my God, I think the game's over." And it's always fun to get on the road and see people and do all that stuff. But it's also, on the flip side, it was great to be home. It was great to watch the games from home. It was great. My wife and I were competing in my bracket challenge, so it was great to, rub her face in it a little bit. I think she was up on me early. I rallied late. So no, man, it was fun. And, the thing I'll say, and I've said it, anyone who's listened to anything that I do, I'm just so grateful we got a tournament, because I think most people probably know this, but maybe don't. College basketball is the only sport that didn't crown a champion in 2020. The NBA had their bubble, Major League Baseball had a shortened season, but everybody had something to give some finality, and these players didn't get that last year. And so for the ones that were fortunate enough or had the opportunity to come back, I'm glad they got this opportunity.
Yeah, it's the only major sport that didn't crown a champion. Felt like the long wait from the 2019 Final Four, which I was actually at in Minnesota, to the start of the 2021 NCAA tournament. And it was an outstanding tournament, ending this past Monday night with Baylor taking down Gonzaga for the national championship. Let's talk about Baylor for a second. The obvious, story of the tournament, going into the tournament with just 2 losses, one in the regular season to Kansas after a COVID pause, one in the Big 12 semifinals to Oklahoma State. They rallied throughout the entire tournament, played really well from start to finish. The only game they really struggled in, I would say, was probably the Villanova game, and they beat Gonzaga wire to wire for the championship. How impressed were you with Baylor in this tournament?
I mean, we were all really impressed. In the Fox Sports Radio, bracket challenge, I was the only one to pick Baylor. So, I mean, I wasn't necessarily surprised by the end result. But like you said, I mean, really outside of 25 minutes against Villanova, 30 minutes against Villanova, they were in complete control this entire tournament. I mean, I go back to even in that Villanova game, they were down, but they never seemed rattled. They never seemed shaken. And when they had to turn on the Jets, they turned on the Jets. And so what I'm impressed most by with Baylor, and I've talked about it a lot, I don't think a lot of people realize this. Let me put it this way. I don't think a lot of people realize how good they were last year. 26-4. The stat that I throw around that blows people's minds, they didn't lose a single game from early November until late February. I mean, we're talking 3 calendar months that they went without a loss. They were banged up. They lost a couple games right before the start of the Big 12 tournament. But, Scott Drew, I talked to him last summer, and he felt like they were rounding back into form. And I think largely that was a team that if you ask the coaching staff, I think they feel like they were built for last year. And so for, to be lucky enough, unlucky in the sense that there's no tournament, but lucky enough that you're mostly able to return the team intact. Obviously, Freddie Gillespie, who I think just made his NBA debut this week or got called up or something. But other than him, everybody else is back. And so I only bring it up because to be lucky enough to bring everybody back, but I've said this is, I think in some ways there was more pressure on Baylor to get to the Final Four than Gonzaga this year. Now, Gonzaga, once it became clear they were going to be undefeated, enter the tournament undefeated, you can't not make a Final Four at that point. But for Baylor, for all those guys to come back and give up NBA dreams, and, Maceo T graduated last year and could have gone pro, probably overseas, for all those guys to sacrifice that and come back, it can't end in the Sweet 16. It can't end in the Elite Eight. You have to at least make the Final Four, and then for them to win the 2 more games after that, that was what blew me away. Is I don't think people realize this was a team that was really built for 2019, 2020, had a chance, to really do something special last year and never got that opportunity. So I was happy for them. Like I said, I was surprised. I wasn't necessarily surprised by the end result, but I was surprised by obviously how one-sided the championship game was.
Yeah, and you mentioned how one side of the championship game was. Baylor won by 14 points, led wire to wire. Gonzaga was within, I think, single digits for only like 3 or 4 minutes of the entire game after the under 16 mark in the first half. It was just complete dominance from Baylor. You mentioned they had probably the best team going into this season. They were built to win last season. Do you think they were truly the number 1 overall team the entire season? I know Gonzaga went wire to wire until the championship, number 1 overall, but do you think we were kind of underlooking Baylor, like they were really the best team all season?
I don't know if they were the best team. What I will say, Harrison, is something you said that I think was a pretty common narrative. And I'm not saying you said it, but you shared a narrative, was that Baylor wasn't the same team once they came out of COVID pause. I really felt like they had 2 bad games. They really struggled against Iowa State, the game right after COVID pause, and then they lost to Kansas. But you look at their final week of the regular season. The Big 12 added a bunch of games, and this is what they did. They went to West Virginia, won at West Virginia. They beat Oklahoma State at home by double figures, and then they crushed Texas Tech on the final day of the regular season. And so I bring that up because, to me, that sounds like the resume of a team that was starting to peak really with about a week left in the season. Now, they lost in the Big 12 tournament, but again, it was to an Oklahoma State team that they had just beaten a week earlier by double figures. And so I never bought that, they were this terrible team or that they weren't who they were in the early part of the season. But to your point, they were every bit as impressive as Gonzaga early, and they did it against, frankly, better competition. Obviously rolling through the Big 12, they had a couple big out-of-conference wins, Illinois, teams like that. So, frankly, maybe they were the best team. And one thing I will say I've been thinking a lot about in hindsight, I don't know if they were better than Gonzaga in November, December, January, February, whatever. I do think it hurt Gonzaga to not play Baylor that first time in December.
Yep.
Not saying they would have won on Monday, but it was so clear that they weren't ready for the speed, the athleticism, the physicality, all of the variables that Baylor brings to the table. And I do wonder, and I was texting somebody kind of around that Gonzaga program, like, if you think it would have been any different? And, he said he didn't want to take anything away from Baylor, but he said, man, if we could have gotten that game in, maybe we would have had a better understanding of what we were getting in for. But it is what it is. It's the nature of the tournament. It's one and done. You only get one shot. You have a bad night, you're out. Like in Illinois, like a Michigan against UCLA, whatever. But I only bring it up to say you're probably right. Baylor probably was the best team prior to their COVID pause, but I never bought the narrative that they weren't really good and peaking going into the tournament. And I also do wonder how different things could have been if we saw that game early, because, it was kind of weird. I feel like there was more buzz about Baylor beating Gonzaga back in December. If I remember correctly, it was about a 2.5 point spread, as opposed to Monday night when it was 4.5, 5 points. So we'll never know. But to your point, you're probably right. Baylor was probably the better team the whole year, and we probably didn't fully realize it. And I include myself in that. I'm not saying, I'm the only guy that knew all this and da-da-da, but I think we were all probably a little guilty of that.
I genuinely think that the game being canceled in December, which had a lot of hype around it, was kind of a blessing in disguise for college basketball, that we got this great, highly anticipated game Monday night. Obviously didn't live up to the expectations of, we thought this would be a down to the wire national championship game. To the other side, Gonzaga had the perfect season going, the whole narrative going around. They had great wins in the season against Kansas, Auburn, West Virginia, Iowa, Virginia, etc. A perfect run in the West Coast Conference. And then kind of stumbled in the tournament. They barely got past UCLA on a historic Jalen Suggs shot, and then got smacked by Baylor in the championship after only having one game the entire season before the Final Four, decided by single digits. Is this a disappointment for Gonzaga?
I don't think it's a disappointment for Gonzaga, because I just think they ran into a better team. Now, are the players disappointed? Of course. Is Mark Few disappointed? Of course. But what I would say in general is, first of all, anyone that's like talking about Gonzaga being overrated or anything like that, they were 31-0 going in the national championship game. And I think when you have a real Gonzaga conversation, there's two different things that can be true. If they didn't play in the WCC, would they be undefeated? Probably not. They would have lost at some point if they played in the Big 12 or the Pac-12 or the Big East or whatever. But I think they were pretty clearly the second best team in college basketball all season long. They really essentially weren't even tested until the Final Four. And really, people talk about, they almost lost to UCLA. I live in LA. UCLA played the game of their lives, and and they still didn't beat Gonzaga. And it shows the level that Gonzaga could get to win that game. What it reminds me of, Harrison, look, we all watched The Last Dance last summer, ESPN, Michael Jordan documentary. And there was a great, scene, 1993. You weren't even, your parents probably hadn't even met yet. You're so freaking young. But, listen, I'm in my 30s. I barely even remember that finals. But I bring it up because, Charles Barkley won the NBA MVP that year. And the Phoenix Suns played the Chicago Bulls in the NBA finals. And there's a great scene where Charles Barkley, he scores like 42 points in a double overtime game, and Michael Jordan scored 48 or whatever, and the Bulls won. And, Charles Barkley had this great line where he's like, that's the first time I ever walked out of the gym, and I just realized there's somebody in the world that's a better basketball player than me. And I always thought every time I walked in the gym, I was the best player on that floor, and I had to accept that there's a better player than me. And that was kind of what I felt like with Gonzaga. When I looked over to their bench on the sidelines, Jalen Suggs was in tears, but everybody else, Corey Kispert, Drew Timme, I think they just kind of visually accepted like that other team was just better than us. And so, I hope people don't look at Gonzaga differently, because to me, I don't think it should take away from who they are and what they did and what they accomplished this year.
I don't think it necessarily takes who they are and what they've accomplished this season. They had one of the great regular seasons in the history of college basketball. But my thing is, if not now, when? They were in the regular season before the national championship against Baylor, clearly the best team all season long. Mark Few, this was his second Final Four, had the escape against South Carolina in the 2017 Final Four down in Glendale, lost close game to North Carolina. It was kind of the same thing. They edged UCLA in the semifinals, and this time got blown out by Baylor. Will you think Mark Few and Gonzaga will ever get over the hump and win that championship?
Yeah, man. Again, you're too young for this stuff, but Coach K, I think, made 5 Final Fours before he won his first national championship. There aren't, outside of maybe Virginia and Villanova, I don't think there's anybody that would trade the last 5 years for what Gonzaga and Mark Few have accomplished. And I think the thing that stands out to me, I was at that game in 2017 against, or 20, yeah, I guess it was 2017 against North Carolina. And what stands out to me about that game specifically, Harrison, is that if you look at the Gonzaga team that was on the court that night, there was a kid named Karnowski, center, big 300-pound player, would have never in a million years sniffed the NBA. Gonzaga starting point guard was Nigel Williams-Goss. Second round pick. He's kind of floating. He's kind of in the NBA. He's kind of not. Starting shooting guard, Josh Perkins is playing overseas. Sixth man, Silas Melson is playing overseas. Really, the only NBA player that played Gonzaga was Zach Collins. Rui Hachimura was on the bench. He now plays for the Washington Wizards, but he didn't play in that game. And so I bring that up because you look at Gonzaga's team this year. I mean, they got probably 4 guys that would play in the NBA next year if they decide to all go into the NBA draft, maybe even 5 with Andrew Nembhard. And I only bring that up to very simply say, I think it's easy to sit here and compare 2017 to 2021. I think it's a completely different program. I think the caliber of player that they're recruiting is through the roof. And I think it's only going to continue to get better. I mean, they just signed a kid in 2021, the high school class of 2021. So this year's seniors named Hunter Salas. He picked Gonzaga over Kentucky and Kansas. I mean, that would have never happened 5, 6, 7 years ago prior to the 2017 national championship, maybe prior to this one. National championship game, I should say. I think with the way the transfer stuff works now, and I know your Tigers are hurting with, Xavier Pinson leaving.
Everyone.
Yeah, there's a lot of kids that are looking around saying, man, I would love to play in that system that Gonzaga played in. And so one of my takeaways, I think it was after the Elite Eight when they crushed USC. I'm not saying they'll ever have a season like this one again where they enter the tournament undefeated, enter the Final Four, enter the national championship game undefeated, but I don't think it's slowing down anytime soon. I think the caliber of player they're going to get to bring in is only going to get better. And then the question is, can they have the chemistry? Can they have the camaraderie that they had this year? Because I still think they have something real, real special going on up there in Spokane.
I think that I think on the national championship day that this is the hardest championship to win, because not only does everything have to go right in the regular season for you to be in a situation to get to the tournament, you also need the good draw to get to the Final Four, and then you need to play 6 straight really good games. And one of those games that Gonzaga played was UCLA. You mentioned earlier. You live in Los Angeles, probably watch a lot of UCLA basketball this year. There's no way you saw this coming, what they did from the first 4 to the Final Four. How impressed and were you shocked at all for the run from Mick Cronin, Tiger Campbell, Johnny Juzang, and the UCLA Bruins?
Well, I'll say this. Of course I'm surprised. Yes, to answer your question, I'm absolutely surprised. The one thing that has kind of bothered me about the conversation around UCLA was that they were some plucky underdog. First of all, I said this throughout the tournament. If you go through their actual recruiting rankings, they probably had one of the highest most talented rosters based on recruiting rankings in the tournament. Johnny Juzang was a top 30 prospect. He obviously started his career at Kentucky. Cody Riley picks UCLA over Kansas. Tiger Campbell could have gone to a lot of different places. You go on and on down the list. Jules Bernard could have gone anywhere in the Pac-12. And, this was the preseason Pac-12 favorite. They were 12-2 and ranked in the top 15 at one point. And so the idea that they were some crazy underdog was just silly. But they struggled down the stretch. They had a bunch of injuries, and it took them a while to regroup. And, oh, by the way, you look at the teams that they lost to late. They lost at Oregon. Oregon made the Sweet 16. They lost to USC at the buzzer. USC made the Elite Eight. They lost to Oregon State in the Pac-12 tournament. Oregon State made the Elite Eight. So, 2 things can be true is, of course, I was shocked. Yes, I'm not going to lie and say that, I picked it in my bracket, 11 seed, whatever. But I also, there were reasons both that they should have been an 11 seed, but there were also reasons to believe that if they could just get a little confidence and momentum that they could have success. So, yeah, I mean, I thought they could get through that first weekend. I didn't think they were going to beat Alabama. I certainly didn't think they were going to beat Michigan. Incredible run. And then the fascinating thing with them is, in theory, they could bring everybody back. Now, I think Johnny Juzang at this point is probably going to consider NBA options. I don't know how you can't after a tournament like that. But at the same time, I just sit there and kind of say, that was a really good team. It was very surprising, but let's also not make them out to be Loyola Chicago or somebody like that.
You have them ranked in your preseason 2021-2022 poll for next season, number 2 overall. They're projected to keep mostly everyone. We'll see if Juzang stays or not. Would you lean towards them getting back to the Final Four or them having a disappointing season for next season, not really living up to the hype that people are kind of setting up right now?
Well, I need to see what their roster looks like on opening night. I mean, the thing is, all of us guys in the media, we do this stuff because fans love it. Now, some of them don't love it if you don't rank their team correctly, because I had a lot of people mad at me. But, we do it mostly because fans love it. But this offseason, more than any other, it's just insanity. I mean, one, you have the normal stuff. Players are going to declare for the draft. They're going to test the waters. Some are just going to decide to go that we're not expecting to go. Some are going to play themselves in position to get drafted that we probably aren't expecting. And like Johnny Juzang is a perfect example. Like I know the staff at UCLA really well. And I mean, 3 weeks ago, the idea that he wasn't going to be back next year was inconceivable. And now it's probably more likely than not that he's probably going to go pro. When is his stock ever going to be higher than it is right now? And so because of it, that's a perfect example of a team that they probably should be ranked number 1 or number 2 going into next year. On the flip side, is that going to be the roster that they have going into 2021, 2022? I mean, I just referenced a player named Cody Riley. He's done 4 years of college basketball. Maybe he's close to getting his degree. Does he want to stay for a 5th year? There's going to be guys on the bench that maybe have to consider, do I want to take a transfer? So, things are going to change. And then on top of, the normal NBA stuff and even the transfer stuff, the thing that's throwing me off with these top 25s is that all these players have an extra year of eligibility. The NCAA has basically said you can come back for another year if you want to, even to seniors. And so what's happening is one of 3 things. Some guys are just saying, you know what, I'm going pro. Forget this. I'm done with college. Some of them are saying, I'm staying in college, sign me up. And a lot of them are saying, I'm going to stay in college, but I'm going to see what my options are out there. Perfect example, Kellen Grady was a 4-time all-conference player in the A-10 at Davidson, and he decides he wants to go to Kentucky for his last year. And good for him. He graduated. He has an extra year. Why not play on the biggest stage in college basketball if you can? But we don't really know what any senior is going to do until they officially announce it. So these rankings are going to change a lot. I mean, I don't know if I've ever gone back and looked at how different they were from day one, from the day after the season ended till the day the season began the following year. But they really do change a lot normally. Normally they change a lot. Now this year, because of the NBA stuff and, nobody could really work out. A lot of the teams that we thought were going to be good, Gonzaga and Baylor specifically, were good. Villanova was good until they had injuries late. But, I think those rankings are going to change quite a bit going into next year.
You mentioned Juzang's tournament run. He's the obvious candidate for what I'm about to ask you. But whose NBA draft stock do you think went up the most in this tournament? Juzang, the obvious candidate, and also the flip side, some guys who maybe got bounced early in the tournament, or they got someone who didn't really play well throughout the tournament. So whose draft stock do you think either went up or went down a lot through the last 6 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one for went up is Davion Mitchell. I watched him. I always thought he was awesome. I follow the NBA draft mock boards and all that. And, it seemed like he was a fringe first-round pick, and I kind of saw it. Okay, you see him in the tournament. I mean, against some of the best backcourts in the country, as you said, Villanova, Houston, one of the best defensive teams in the country. And he's a true two-way player. And, I think the thing that a lot of people don't realize about the NBA is that, it's a scenario where, you have a situation where most guys in the NBA are role players. And I think for a 4th-year player like Davion Mitchell, he understands I'm not going to get 20 shots a game in the NBA. I have to play defense. I have to play off the ball. I have to distribute. I have to be a good teammate. And so I think, that's going to appeal to teams that, there's only a couple teams that are really looking for superstar franchise-changing players. Everybody else is looking for guys that can fit roles. And I think he's a guy that can definitely do that. On the flip side, somebody, I don't know if his stock was really hurt per se, but I was hoping he'd go on a deep tournament run so everybody could see how good he was, is Ayo Dosunmu from Illinois, man. I mean, He was an incredible player all year. I thought at a time he should win National Player of the Year. Now I get it. The last 2-3 weeks of the season, he missed a game with a broken nose, all that stuff. But I only bring it up to say that, he was a guy that I truly believed. I had a kind of a saying that I went to a little bit before the NCAA tournament, which was that, Cade Cunningham was going to end up being the number one pick, but that I thought Ayo Dosunmu was the best college basketball player in the NCAA tournament. And, listen, part of the fun of the tournament is all of the stuff that happens, all the potential upsets. And that's the fun part. And that's the part that we love. But I also hate that he didn't get a stage to show how good he was. Same with Kofi Coburn, because they were such a fun team to watch throughout the regular season. And I'm just disappointed that those kids didn't really get that stage to show America how good they were.
I love Davion Mitchell. I watched a lot of Baylor basketball this year because I thought the whole season they were the best team. I picked them in my bracket. He's going to be such a good – coaches are going to love him in the NBA. The way he plays defense, the way he hustles, he can hit big shots. You said it perfectly. He's going to be the perfect role player. And I don't think he's going to go high enough where he's going to be asked to be a starter on his team next season, but I think he's going to fall in that 13 to 17 range where these fringe playoff teams are going to add a hustle guy like Davion Mitchell, and he's really going to help them, maybe push them into the playoffs and they can run in the 2022 NBA playoffs. I want to ask you about the transfer portal. It's been the biggest news. Obviously, the Missouri Tigers have lost like their entire team to it. Over 1,000 players in all of college basketball have entered. What are your thoughts on the system as a whole?
What I would say is really quick is that it's really funny, Harrison, because you do this long enough, people, you see everything. And so for years, I've never been a big fan of the one-time transfer rule. And just about everybody else in the media, these guys should be able to come, they should be able to go. And this was kind of the year that I was like, you know what? Nobody cares about what my opinion is, and I'm just going to accept this because I'm not going to be able to change it no matter what I say. And I find it funny because a lot of the biggest advocates for the one-time transfer over the last 4, 5, 6 years are now complaining, oh my God, look at all the players that are in the portal. It's like, well, you can't really have it both ways, man, And so for me, it is what it is. And I will say, I think it's a little bit overblown. Like I said, there's a lot of players that have an extra year of eligibility this year that are pursuing other options. Kellen Grady, who's committed to Kentucky, is one I mentioned. Daryl Morcell, who played at Maryland, is considering going to the NBA, but is also considering coming back to college and playing somewhere else. And so from my perspective, I just think kids are taking advantage of that last year to see what their best option is, what they can best do to position themselves. So I bring all this up just to say, I don't like the one-time transfer rule, but I never have. I've been outspoken about this for 5, 6 years now, 4 or 5 years, whatever it is. And I just find it funny that some of the people that have complained the most about it are the ones that complain the most about, oh, players need to be able to do whatever they want. They're now the ones that are complaining that there's too many guys in the portal. And I just think that's ridiculous.
I'll get you on this because I know you're a busy guy. I agree with the transfer portal thing you just mentioned. Top 5 buzzer beaters you have seen in the NCAA tournament with your own eyes. After this Jalen Suggs one, people want to put it 1 and 2. Shots that you have watched live, not before you were born. I know for me that's a bigger thing because I'm young and I wasn't live for the Leitner shot or the Houston buzzer beater. Top 5 tournament buzzer beaters that you have seen.
The only one that comes to mind, I was courtside for the Villanova North Carolina game, and obviously for that to end the way that it did was just absolutely unreal. I mean, to be there and, I was 50 feet away from where Chris Jenkins hit that shot. That's the only one that immediately comes to mind. There's been other great buzzer beaters. I was fortunate enough as a fan. I grew up in Connecticut. I was at the UConn 6 overtime game, which you were probably 2009. How old were you at that point?
March of 2009. I was 7.
Yeah. So I was at that game. I was recently graduated from college. I was with a girl I was dating at that time. So that was a really fun game. There was a buzzer beater to send it into the first overtime. And 5 overtimes later, Syracuse ended up winning. I was there for Jerry McNamara in 2006 when you were definitely really young. Jerry McNamara beat UConn on a buzzer beater at Madison Square Garden in the Big East tournament. So I've been to a few. I mean, there's been a bunch in the NCAA tournament. I'm trying to think of what other ones, but no, man, I'll say this, the Suggs one, I'll tell you this, man, I try not to overreact in real time to stuff. That UCLA Gonzaga game, just from start to finish, not even the shot, that was the best college basketball game I think I've ever seen, man. I mean,
I agree.
Like you, I'm a little young. I don't, you weren't born for the Leitner shot. I don't remember I don't remember that era of college basketball. I was too young, but at the same time, The Leitner shot was, to a certain generation, but, Vern Lundquist called the Christian Leitner Duke Kentucky game, and Vern Lundquist claims that the best game that he's ever seen in college basketball was UCLA Gonzaga. So, to me, I love that game happened. I love that 15 million people were watching. I love that, people got to see how great college basketball is. But to your point, that was up there, not even with the buzzer beater, just in terms of great games. I mean, that was just played at such a high level. The degree of difficulty, the shots that UCLA made were insane. And so I'm glad that everyone got to watch that game because it was a classic all-timer. And I think for people of our generation that are a little young to remember Leitner versus, Duke Kentucky in 92, this is the one that we'll be telling our grandchildren about and our children about. And, when we're watching the NCAA tournament with our children, we could say, yeah, that game you just watched was great, but you should have seen UCLA Gonzaga back in 2021,
Everyone loves a good NCAA tournament buzzer beater. Huge thank you to Aaron Torres for coming on the podcast, talking all things college basketball. Take care, Aaron.
Thank you for having me, Harrison. I appreciate it, man.
Huge thank you to Aaron Torres for coming on the podcast, talking all things 2021 NCAA tournament with Baylor, Gonzaga, UCLA, and so much more. Go listen to Aaron's podcast, the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your music and podcasts. Aaron's a really good guy. Check out all his content there. Coming up next in the Harrison Vapnek podcast, I think sometime this weekend, early next week, we're going to have on Tyler Henry, who's a play-by-play announcer for University of Northern Colorado baseball. Talk about some play-by-play tips with him. A lot of his career from Arizona State and so much more. Good guy. So stay tuned for that coming up on the Harrison Vapnek podcast, and have a great weekend. We'll see you next time on the Harrison Vapnek podcast. See ya.